The cowboy had been counting days by sunsets, not by numbers. Every evening for 3 months, he stood by the old road outside town and watched the horizon turn copper and gold, waiting for the wagon that carried the woman whose name he had read so many times the paper had gone soft in his hands. But when the stagecoach finally rolled through the dust into the little town of Red Hollow, 2 women stepped down. They were identical, same dark hair, same gray eyes, same careful way of looking at a stranger before offering a smile. And in that moment, every soul in town stopped breathing. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how one promise changed 3 lives forever, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this travel farther when people carry them together. Now listen closely, because what happened that autumn in Red Hollow was something the people there never forgot. In the fall of 1884, Red Hollow was a hard place carved out of harder land. It sat between long stretches of yellow grass and distant mountains that looked purple at dusk. Most men there knew more about surviving winter than about happiness. They knew the language of horses, fences, drought, and silence. They buried wives, sons, and dreams in the same stubborn soil. Among them lived Caleb Mercer. Caleb was 33 and already looked older. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his hands carried scars from rope burns, broken fences, and winters when cattle died faster than he could count. People respected him because he worked harder than anyone and complained less than anyone. But they also knew something else. Caleb Mercer was lonely in a way that frightened people. 5 years earlier, fever had taken his young wife, Ruth, and their baby boy within the same week. After that, Caleb had changed. He spoke only when needed. He stopped coming to church except for funerals. He stopped singing. He stopped laughing. He poured every waking hour into his ranch because labor was the only thing that kept memory from swallowing him whole. Then one night in late spring, old Martha Grady from the general store had found him staring at a shelf of coffee he hadn't even picked up. Martha was 70 if she was a day, sharp-eyed and impossible to fool. "You look like a man haunting himself," she had said. "I'm buying coffee. You've been staring at it 10 minutes. He had given a tired half-smile. She leaned closer. "You need somebody to come home to." He almost laughed at the absurdity. "Ain't exactly many ladies waiting around Red Hollow. There are women back east looking for honest men and honest futures." That was how the idea of a mail-order bride entered his life. At first it felt foolish. Too desperate. Too strange. But that night the house felt colder than usual. He looked at Ruth's old blue shawl folded in the chest at the foot of the bed. He thought of how silence had become another person in the house. So he wrote. He wrote awkwardly at first. "My name is Caleb Mercer. I own 60 acres and 42 head of cattle." That sounded like a business letter. He crumpled it. The next one came from somewhere deeper. "My name is Caleb. I am not young, and I am not polished. I know how to mend a fence in the dark and how to tell when rain is 2 days away. I don't promise riches. I promise honesty. I promise steadiness. I promise there will always be coffee in the morning and a fire in winter. I have known loss. If you have too, perhaps we might understand each other." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from a woman named Eleanor Whitmore from St. Louis. She wrote that she was 27. Her father had died in debt. Her mother followed the next winter. She worked as a seamstress but could barely pay rent. She was not looking for romance from novels. She was looking for dignity, partnership, and the chance to build a home where kindness mattered. Their letters grew longer. He told her about the creek behind the barn, about how the cottonwoods turned silver before rain, about the mare Daisy who bit anyone but him. She told him about city streets after rain, about her younger sister Lucy, about how she used to play piano before they sold it to pay doctor bills. He found himself waiting for her letters with a nervousness he hadn't felt since youth. In those pages, something inside him began to thaw. By August, Eleanor wrote that she had accepted his proposal. She would come west in October. Caleb read that letter 5 times. He repaired the porch. He painted the front door. He bought curtains from Martha Grady. The whole town noticed. "Mercer's fixing to become human again," said Eli Porter at the saloon. Even Caleb could not hide the fragile hope growing in him. On the morning the wagon came, the whole town somehow had errands near the station. The driver climbed down first. Then the women stepped out. For a second Caleb thought grief had cracked his mind. 2 women. Identical. One wore a blue traveling dress. The other wore brown. Same face. Same eyes. The woman in blue stepped forward first. Mr. Mercer. His mouth was dry. Eleanor. Yes. He looked at the other. This is my sister Lucy. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Lucy lowered her gaze. She looked pale and exhausted. Caleb managed, your letter didn't mention. Eleanor swallowed. I know. I should have told you. She glanced at Lucy, then back at him. She had nowhere else. That night, after they had eaten in strained silence, Eleanor finally told the truth. Lucy had been engaged back east. Her fiancé had taken her savings, promised marriage, and disappeared. Soon after, their landlord threw her out. She had been sick for weeks. Eleanor could not leave her alone. I was afraid if I told you, you might tell me not to come, Eleanor said quietly. Caleb sat with his hands clasped. He had imagined many things. Not this. This is a small house, he said. I know. Town talks. I know. He looked at Lucy. She seemed smaller than her sister somehow, though they shared a face. Lucy spoke for the first time. I can work. I don't ask charity. If you want me gone once I'm stronger, I'll go. Something in her voice reached him. Not pride exactly. Not pity. Just bruised dignity. All right, he said at last. You stay till winter. Then we decide. Eleanor exhaled like someone who had been holding breath for days. At first the arrangement was awkward as stones. Caleb barely knew where to look. He'd enter the kitchen and see one twin at the table, then another by the stove, and feel as though reality itself had gone crooked. But slowly, life began to settle. Eleanor was practical. She organized the pantry, mended clothes, kept accounts better than Caleb ever had. She brought order. Lucy was quieter. She moved like someone afraid of taking up too much space. But she noticed things. She fed the chickens before dawn. She sat with the old ranch dog when he limped. She spoke softly to frightened horses. One morning Caleb found her standing near Daisy, the mare that trusted nobody. She'll kick, he warned. Lucy didn't move. Only if she thinks you're angry. She thinks everybody's angry. Then somebody taught her that. The mare lowered her head into Lucy's palm. Caleb stared. For the first time in years, he felt surprised by another human being. Autumn deepened. For a while it almost felt like peace. Then trouble came. The first snow arrived early, and with it sickness. Lucy collapsed in the yard carrying firewood. Fever burned through her so fiercely that Eleanor wept beside the bed. The doctor rode out in sleet and said her lungs were weak from illness and hunger. She needs warmth, broth, and time, he said. And prayer. For 6 days Caleb barely slept. He chopped wood, hauled water, rode through snow to fetch medicine. At night he sat by the fire listening to Lucy's ragged breathing. On the 4th night she opened her eyes. You should sleep, she whispered. So should you. You've done enough. No, he said. Not yet. She studied him through fever. Why? He looked down at his hands. Because I know what it is to lose somebody when you think maybe one more hour could have mattered. Her eyes softened. When Lucy recovered, something had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but the house felt warmer. Eleanor noticed it first. Caleb smiled more around Lucy. Lucy spoke more around Caleb. The silences between them were no longer heavy. And Eleanor, being wiser than either of them, began to understand something she had not expected. One evening she stood by the creek and said, "Do you care for her?" Caleb went still. He answered after a long moment. "I didn't mean to." Neither did she. He looked at her with pain in his face. "I gave you my word. You gave me honesty," Eleanor said. "That matters more." He stared at the dark water. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You haven't." But her voice trembled. That was the hardest winter of all. The truth sat at the table with them. Lucy, once she understood, withdrew. She offered to leave in spring. "I won't come between you," she told Eleanor through tears. "You are not between us," Eleanor said. "You are part of me. But I love him." Eleanor closed her eyes. "I know." For weeks nobody knew what future could possibly come. Then fate made the choice harder. A cattle buyer from Wichita arrived in March. He was well dressed, charming, and rich enough to turn heads. He took notice of Eleanor immediately. Unlike Caleb, He was easy with words. He spoke to her about books, music, cities, and possibilities beyond Red Hollow. At first Caleb felt relief. Then, to his surprise, sadness. One afternoon he found Eleanor sitting on the porch. "You thinking of going?" he asked. "Maybe. Would you be happy?" She smiled faintly. "You still ask the wrong question. What's the right one? Would I be myself?" He sat beside her. "Would you?" She thought a long time. "Yes," she said. "I think maybe I would." He nodded, though it hurt. "And Lucy? She'll only stay if she believes I'm not sacrificing myself." He understood. The next day he saddled his horse and rode out with Lucy to mend the north fence. Wind bent the grass low. He stopped near the ridge. "I loved Ruth," he said. Lucy waited. "For years I thought loving again would mean betraying her. And now I think grief is love with nowhere to go." Her eyes filled. He stepped closer. "I don't know what future looks like. I only know when this house feels like home now." She whispered, "Caleb, I love you." Lucy began to cry. "So do I." That spring, Eleanor left Red Hollow. Not alone. The cattle buyer, Thomas Avery, asked if he might write to her. She said yes. Before the wagon departed, the three stood together in morning light. Lucy clung to her sister. "What if I'm choosing wrong?" Eleanor touched her face. "Then choose with courage. That way it will still be yours." Then she turned to Caleb. "Take care of her." "I will." "You'd better." They laughed through tears. A year later, Eleanor married Thomas in Wichita. She wrote often. She had a piano again. She taught children music. Her letters were full of light. And Lucy married Caleb under the cottonwoods behind the house. No preacher from the city could have made it finer. Martha Grady cried openly. Eli Porter pretended dust was in his eye. Years passed. Children came. First a girl, with Lucis eyes. Then a boy who followed calves into trouble. The ranch prospered, but not because of cattle. Because of laughter returning to rooms that had once held only sorrow. Sometimes at dusk Caleb would sit on the porch while Lucy played softly inside. He would think of the day two identical women stepped off that wagon and how he had believed life was mocking him. He had been wrong. Life was giving him something stranger than what he expected, and better than what he planned. One summer Eleanor came to visit with Thomas and their little son. The sisters stood together in the yard, older now but still mirrors in some ways. Caleb watched them and felt something close to awe. Not because life had become perfect. It hadn't. There were droughts, losses, hard winters, and graves. But love had returned to ground he once thought dead forever. Many years later, when Caleb's hair had turned white and his hands shook pouring coffee, his daughter asked him, "Papa, were you scared the day Mama came to Red Hollow?" He smiled. "No." She laughed. "That ain't true." He nodded. "All right. I was terrified." "Then why'd you keep going?" He looked toward Lucy in the garden. "Because sometimes the road to what saves you looks nothing like what you expected." That is what the people of Red Hollow remembered. Not the gossip. Not the surprise. Not the strange beginning. They remembered that a broken man waited for one future and was brave enough to recognize another when it arrived. And maybe that matters for you too. Sometimes life does not bring the person, answer, or season you prayed for. Sometimes it sends something more confusing, more complicated, more painful at first glance. But not every unexpected arrival is a mistake. Sometimes it is mercy wearing unfamiliar clothes. Sometimes what feels like the wrong turn becomes the road home. And if you are standing in your own kind of waiting tonight, if you feel like the horizon has forgotten your name, hold on. The wagon may already be coming. And when it does, it may carry more than you asked for. It may carry exactly what your heart needs.